Welcome to Not Another Whiskey podcast. It's Daz here once again. I am left to my own devices. Mitch, who I host this podcast with, is up in Speyside, running around Glenfiddich and Balvenie today, I think, with some of his American friends. So I'm delighted to be joined by Ian and Paddy, who are a more reliable double act, it would seem, from the Port of LEITH distillery, which is a really, really exciting project, right? Bringing distilling back to LEITH, back to an area where I actually used to live, an area I'm very, very fond of. How are you guys doing today? What's happening?
Morning, Daz. Yeah, we're doing really well. The office heating has finally been put on. There was a staff rebellion, and we've been forced to turn the radiators on. So,
there's kind of so much going on that sometimes we forget to turn the heating on. But generally speaking, yeah, it's all under control. That's
it. Don't do it. You might be out of business by the end of the month, man. Don't do that.
Well, don't remind me. I had to remind the staff that companies do not get capped energy bills, and this is a really expensive way of keeping them.
Yeah. How do you guys know each other? How did you guys get together and end up on this mad project?
Sure. So, I mean, we're kind of lifelong friends. Paddy and I, we met. He was 5, I was 4. We were probably in a playground, and we've just known each other forever. And this came together really in our 20s, because after university, we both ended up in London together, sharing a flat, where Paddy would never turn the heating on. Actually, some things never change. And
you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
We survived.
Yeah. It was kind of during that time, I'd gone into the wine industry, and Paddy had become an accountant. And you're kind of in your 20s, working too hard and not being paid enough. So we'd sort of go to the supermarket, get whatever was on discount in terms of whiskey from Sainsbury's or whatever, and sort of sit there on the sofa chatting about it and chatting about whiskey. And then we started going to tastings, and then things got a bit out of hand, and we started sort of getting interested in making whiskey, and we sort of started experimenting with elements of whiskey production. And that's where just the whole thing of, I suppose, that so many whiskey fans out there have had, of wouldn't it be so cool if we could build a distillery and make our own whiskey? And it really began from there. And I think when we've been experimenting, like playing with whiskey production, we discovered so much about it, and we discovered that there's this big bit in it, fermentation, and yeast, and we discovered there was quite an opportunity there to do some interesting things with whiskey production. So we're thinking, if we can make our own whiskey, do something really interesting with that. And then the other piece was, having come from Edinburgh and being stuck in London, we obviously wanted to go back home to Edinburgh. And we were thinking, well, at the time, there wasn't a whiskey distillery in our home city. So it was those two things: build a whiskey distillery in our home city and do something really interesting with the fermentation part of whiskey production. That was the kind of genesis of this idea. And so began the longest kind of journey in the history of time. So.
I think, in parallel to all of that, I was working for these technology startups in London that were raising tens of millions of pounds and burning that kind of cash really quickly. And I was thrust into the finance team of these businesses, watching modestly, useless, incompetent bosses burn through money without really thinking too hard about it. And I remember saying to Ina, doesn't it be that difficult to find some money and deploy it? And we can do it better than these guys.
And not burn it and not waste it, right? Yeah.
There's a better
isn't it?
There's a better business model here. I was working at WeWork, which famously burned through billions and billions of dollars of capital for a ticketing startup that got through $30 million. And I just kept thinking, I was looking at the chief executives of those companies, thinking, you're not focusing on what you should be doing inside here, and if you did, you wouldn't be fired after a few years of ignominious cash burn. So that kind of was really helpful to us in the just that genesis of being say, I think we can do this. Entrepreneurs aren't superhumans; they're just normal people. And as a result, I think we've got a business model here that is the issue, of course, with whiskey is that because you can't sell it for several years, you're stuck behind a horrific cash flow problem where all your money is spent up front on your building, your equipment, and then waiting. And so you build.
And it doesn't get cheaper, right? It snowballs, because then you need staff. You then need more materials. Then you need storage, and it gets more expensive actually, rather than
And so, we were looking around for ideas, and having been through an awful lot of distillery tours and looking at Edinburgh specifically, you're going, well, there's no distillery in Edinburgh. You've got something about 45 minutes south and something about 45 minutes north, and in the city centre, you've got the Scotch whisky experience that pulls in hundreds of thousands of visitors. And we're like, well, at least a portion of those people will want to go and see a real distillery in Edinburgh and not have a car to drive out to the countryside. So that's a cash flow that you can use up front to help balance the books until you've got some product to sell.
Yeah. And visitors are massive. I mean, I remember I used to run some of the brand homes over at some of the other companies, White Mackay and places like Edrington and stuff. And the numbers every year of visitors were going up, and the spend was going up even more than the volume. People were spending a lot more, and there's such an opportunity there, isn't there? And like you say, Edinburgh, what's it, 2.5 million tourists a year just for the festival, something crazy like that, for a place that only 700,000 people live. It's mad. Yeah. 5
million across the year, and quite evenly balanced. I mean, obviously there's a spike in August, but for the rest of the year, there's Hogmanay that pulls people in. And then there's just a fantastic stat that says almost everyone who comes to Edinburgh doesn't come with a car; they come by public transport, which means that they, we've got a, expensive but ultimately will be completed soon tram system that brings people down to Leith, that just creates that much easier route to get people down to see us. And so, the opportunity to build it in Leith for us was just completely glaringly obvious. We wanted to be in the middle of a busy urban area with lots of people where you can take a little bit of coolness from the neighborhood you're in.
I think
I love that.
That visitor thing and that business model was so key, because obviously Paddy had developed a great expertise in how to run a company, like he'd seen it happen, and I, on the other hand, had learned how to create brands and how to sell booze. Like around the world, I was exporting wine to Southeast Asia. I was selling loads of wine into Marks and Spencer's in the UK. So we had those skills, but obviously we'd never run a whiskey company before. We'd never built a whiskey brand. And so when you want to go out and raise £1 million of investment, it's a hard sell to people out there that, we've never done this before, but hey, we can do it. But having that strong business case on the tourism element definitely was a strong sort of ace up our sleeves, so that people could say, particularly when we found the site for our whiskey distillery in Leith, and it was just 20 meters away from the Royal Yacht Britannia, that attracts back in 2019 was almost 400,000 visitors in that year. We knew that investors would look at this business plan and they'd say, well, I don't know about these two idiots and whether or not they can make whiskey, but I think that site will make money, whatever happens. And so that was that was the vehicle that sort of could get us through. But with what was really driving us in the background was all about whiskey and what we could do with Scotch whisky. Because I think, as two big fans of whiskey, back in the sort of late noughties and going into the 10s as well, we were looking at the whiskey world, and so much exciting stuff was happening, but it felt like most of the excitement was happening outside of Scotland. Like when you looked at America, like in New York, we went out to see Kings County Distillery. And there were more distilleries. There are now more distilleries in New York State alone than there are in Scotland. You saw these amazing new distilleries emerging in Southeast Asia, even in England. But at the time, there wasn't yet that sort of new wave emerging in Scotland. And so we wanted to be part of that, of creating a sort of a new breed of Scotch whisky distillery up here with a new approach to whiskey. And now, of course, there are many others who followed that path, and it's a very exciting time to in Scotland as well. But it wasn't there yet, I think, in the sort of 2010s and late noughties. So.
You're 4 years old. You meet in a playground somewhere, and now here you are, and you're well down the tracks in terms of having your own Scotch distillery. What's the update at Portaleith? Where are you guys at on the journey?
So we broke ground in December 2019, and so we managed to get 4 months of construction under our belt before the site was closed. And there was by COVID, and there was a sort of general panic in the air, and so we were shut down for about 7-8 months, and then since then the program was dragged out by just lack of materials, getting hold of construction materials, getting hold of workers, of bricklayers, of specialists, because the site that we're on, there's a lot of very specialist trades that are needed. Steel workers. These guys are up on 9 stories up in 40-mile-an-hour winds. Trying to bolt 2-ton bits of steel together. This is a difficult.
Yeah, it's not you and Ian just whacking up a couple of shelves, is it? It's not quite the same.
Yeah, and
I'm sure you're very good at it.
But my shelves are very level.
I've got very bad vertigo. I would have done well up there.
We could have built a tin shed in the field that we've done in 6 months, and I think. But the crucial thing was we wanted to be in LEITH, and therefore it made the whole project that much more complicated. But the end result is worth it. So the opening date now for making whiskey is going to be sometime around March 2023, and we hope to be open to visitors by Easter.
Yeah.
Don't hold me to those dates because everything slips at the current rate. But there's less that can go wrong now than there was yesterday, and even less by tomorrow, and so on.
Yeah, it has been a very protracted construction period. But then, of course, we are building a building that no one's ever built before. I mean, there is another vertical distillery in the world, there's McMira, but that's purely a production facility. Ours is a production facility with then the sort of visitor floors above. And not only that, but we're building on reclaimed land right next to a harbour wall. It's just an incredible engineering challenge, and it's been an incredibly challenging building to build. Now, also, we've got a postage-size site. It's so just from a practical perspective, getting the materials there, etc. So it's been one challenge after another. We've now developed a very niche expertise in how to build a vertical distillery. Probably wouldn't do it again.
But next time, building a tin shed.
Yeah. Finding big site, build it nice and horizontal. But the net result is looking absolutely amazing now. So it's particular. We were just on site on Monday, showing some people around, and you could see, we've got all the pipework now coming in for all the production materials. The top floors, the floors have been laid. You can begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's going to be amazing.
That's super cool.
The last panes of glass will go in, and suddenly you won't be standing there with the wind kind of whistling through the skeleton. So there's definitely an acceleration of how it feels to be on site at the moment, and it's very exciting.
It is, it's cool. I was chatting to the guys at Stauning Distillery over in Denmark recently, and we were having a fun conversation with those guys. And one of the things they said, which really sort of stuck out, Lasse, he's the kind of engineer, one of the engineers that's behind it. He'd said that if they'd had experience in whiskey, they wouldn't be here today, because everything they did was so different from floor malting. All the bits and pieces they had to learn to do, they learned to do in Denmark without all the Scotch whiskey experience and all that sort of stuff. And listening to you guys, it sounds like it's quite similar, actually. Perhaps you would have said this is impossible had you not, had you come from a Scotch background, you would never have even approached it in the way you've done it, right? It feels like that's what I'm hearing.
I completely agree. I think it's interesting. I was actually at a standing in the summer they hosted a conference there, and it was fascinating facility, But again, you look at their still floor, and there's 24 stills there, and they're all tiny, direct fire, and they're just approaching things in a completely different way. And I think, if you look at what we've tried to do with fermentation and yeast and so on, if you were to do this in the kind of standard, here's a consultancy approach thing of everyone, coming from a background in the industry, you probably wouldn't have done what we've done, because no one wants to use the word yeast in their marketing materials because it's a slightly weird word. If you say the word yeast, you might think infection, and that's not a place you want to really be putting in on a billboard. But, we saw it from a different angle, because I think, as Ian mentioned, when we were experimenting with the concepts of making whiskey in our garden, we just couldn't find any information on that fermentation stage. There was no one explaining what to do. So we were just making it up, and it became that was the genesis of saying, well, why does no one talk about this? Because there's so much interesting things to talk about. And that led into the research program that we did with Heriot Watt, where we kind of very handily, spend a lot of time and energy and money on this research program of all these different yeasts. And we came up with the idea that actually, you can see you nosing it right there.
I'm actually nosing your Belgian ale yeast, which was the 72-hour fermentation, and it's fabulous. It's really brilliant. I mean, I love the yellow fruits that you get from it. There's tons of honey in there as well, so it's really promising all of that lovely sweetness. I like from one of my favorite beers is a triple Carmelite, which is that kind of really sweet honeyed Belgian beer. Quite strong though, and you get a lot of those notes off of that. It's delicious.
Yeah, but it's fun. I mean, as you say, we came to this as industry outsiders, and definitely we've been powered by naivety, without a doubt. But it's interesting is that, like, as you took these very naive questions, going, this yeast thing, everyone seems to be using distillers yeast. Is there opportunities to find flavors of other things? And you go to people in the industry, and actually they go, yeah, you're onto something. There's definitely an opportunity here, and it was almost just daring to ask very simple questions to some extent. And you realize that lots of people, and it must be said, as we began to immerse ourselves in the industry, we found so many people who were willing to share their experience and talk to us and sort of power us on and go, absolutely, follow this. There's way forward. I mean, I remember, our first meeting with Annie Hill at Harriet Watt, for example, where, we really didn't know what we were talking about. But that kernel of what we gathered from our activities in the garden, she said, there is something here and we can help you explore it further. And then we spoke to people who'd been running whiskey companies for however long and said, do this. Yes, you can do it. So it's naivety, but also powered by encouragement from those already in the industry that sort of drove us forward. The results have been, with the research program that we undertook, we didn't go out there and say, oh, we're going to find this yeast and it's going to do this to our whiskey. We went out there with a completely open mind and to be sort of results led and just see what we could discover. So we went out there and on the sort of paper led research part, identified 24 different yeasts that we thought had potential. And we looked at the brewing sectors, we looked at wine and sake, rum. And we trialed all of these. And I remember, the first time that our research associate, Vicky, who did incredible work running the research, and she'd let us sort of analyze the first spirits that she'd taken. And we were just blown away. We're like, wow, just the sheer diversity, using the same grain, the same stills, the same fermentation, with just the yeast interchanged. The incredible diversity of aromas and flavors you were getting.
What kind of surprised you? Was there any sort of standouts that you thought, wow, we were not expecting that,
Well, I think when you look at fermentation in the whole sort of whiskey production process, fermentation is where you're seeking to get those sort of primary fruit characteristics more than anything else. It's where if you're going to get like crisp apple or fresh peach or those sort of elements, it's going to come from the fermentation. The secondary things like your vanilla, your toffee, that's probably coming more from the cask and maturation. So we knew we were probably looking for those sort of primary fruit characteristics. But then when you take that Belgian ale strain, I think you're getting those typical sort of cereal notes that you'd expect to get from a new make. I think you're getting lovely sort of peach and honey notes in there as well, with remarkable intensity. Then when you take that other spirit that we made with Vosk Fiek, I think the contrast is just a world away. And I think it was that one more than anything else that blew me away. Just with it's sort of just dried raisins, dried fruits, and incredible intensity in those aromas. The contrast, of all of them, we all honed in on that one.
It was fascinating. Ian and I disagree on almost everything, but on the blind taste test where we were going around the table, and we were whittling it down from 24 strains to get down to say we're going to do 2. We both chose the exact same one, Vosk Fiek, as our favorite, and I think some of the other teams as well did, but I don't care about the other team. It's just us. It doesn't matter. That was fascinating. Of course, it happens to be the most expensive yeast that was available.
Yeah.
It is literally described as a Norwegian farmhouse ale yeast, the most hipster sounding yeast that is existing in Europe right now.
Like the complexity already in the new make is quite extraordinary, in my view. But more than anything else, for me, I think it's the intensity of them that blew me away. I mean, the Belgian ale strain, I think I could blind taste that and think that it had spent some time in cask. I think it already has an intensity that seems to suggest some level of maturity, which is quite exciting. And then, of course, the challenge for us now, moving forward, is, with all this work that we've done in creating these spirits, and it's work that we're going to, by the way, continue, because the research never stops. Not only do we want to continue to trial further yeast strains, but also see how, adjusting the way we ferment them and treat them is also going to enhance the spirit. But, with all that work that we do in the distillery on the still, in the fermentation vats in the still, we then need to make sure that we're not going to overpower it in the future during the maturation process. So, very judicious use of oak and a very careful wood plan, so that all those elements, and this really, is something that we're kind of borrowing from the wine world, the idea of balance and making sure that all those elements can exist in harmony and balance. And you can 8 years, 10 years from now, when you're sipping our whiskey and it's matured, you'll still get those elements that came through in the ferment, as well as the notes that we have with the maturation. So there's still a lot to achieve moving forward.
Yeah, it's exciting to hear you guys talking so much about those early stages. We've been on chatting away for sort of 20 minutes or so, and you've talked about fermentation and yeast about 6 or 7 times. It's brilliant to hear. So often, certainly where I've come from in the past, we talked a lot about, used to talk about Macallan. In 1998, they created the kind of 6 pillars as they're known, which are the kind of foundations of their brand, if you like, and they've changed a lot over the years. But there was a book actually that Charlie McLean wrote, and one of the 6 pillars was a cocktail of yeasts, a cocktail of brewer and distillers yeasts. It was 4 different yeasts that would go into their washbacks back then. It's not the case now, and it's fascinating how much fermentation has been standardized across the industry. Which could lead, and a point of view would be that there's been a homogenization of flavor because of 55-hour fermentation times, Kerry M, Kerry MX. A lot of distilleries using that. A lot of distilleries using the same barleys as well. So that's natural that would happen over time. If everyone's sort of standardizing, you're going to see that kind of almost homogenization of flavor. And these new distilleries, which you're part of, really zigzagging away from that, and going, we love this. You're so curious, you're so interested in those early stages, and you're not bound by the consistency that some of the more modern, established, more established, not modern, more established distillers have.
I think there's an interesting point around, if you're building a new business that's a tech startup and you've got a brand new product, a new app, or whatever it might be, you've got a USP that is, I'm trying to change this, make something brand new. If you're coming into an industry that's quite traditional and already in existence, and everyone has an understanding and expectation of what the product is, and there are quite strict rules around how you make that product. Yes, it's amazing for us to be able to say we're going to make Scotch whiskey because that's a fantastic brand, and you get access to that as long as you just play by the rules. Yeah. But how do you then differentiate yourself? And also, why would you bother doing it if you're just going to make the same thing that someone else is already making? I don't really see the point in starting a brand new whiskey distillery and saying, I want to try and make exactly what Macallan are making right now, so let's just copy their model. Because I just don't see the point. And I think for us, that element of differentiation of saying, well, what is there that Scotch whiskey isn't doing that we could do that's new and interesting and will excite people about the category and bring people to us? We didn't start this because we didn't like Scotch. We started this business because we love Scotch. But there are still little avenues that you can follow in the process that are currently undeclared. And I think, the biggest risk we've got is that having gone down this route with all these yeasts, we'll find that the alcohol yield from a ton of barley is lower than ideal. And we'll have a big argument where I'll be saying, this doesn't make any money. And you'll be saying, yes, but it tastes great. And I will say, yes, but it's a huge amount of bottle. And then there'll be some kind of discussion in the middle there. I think,
I'll win it.
So look forward to Port Distillery whiskey at £400 a bottle, because that's the only way we can make money.
But it is interesting, when you're trying to break. Paddy mentioned, the horrendous barrier to entry to Scotch whiskey, and when you're starting out, you kind of go, I wish we were like 20 years into this already. We had loads of mature whiskey, and it's amazing once you're at that stage. But actually, the further we go into it, you just revel in your newness, actually, and all the opportunities that provides. A completely blank slate and a complete opportunity to do things differently. And I think we decided pretty quickly that we were going to set aside the idea of efficiency and actually concentrate 100% on flavor. As I say, prepare to be results led and take go where the research led us. But the other aspect to that is, the more we've discovered, the more we've learned how much there is to discover. And on that, we want to continue to be new, in perpetuity. So we're also going to set aside the idea of consistency. So we intend to release our whiskey in the future in vintages. So each year, so for example, everything, next year will be our first year of production, 2023. Everything that we produce in that year will be matured for, at the moment, we've seen somewhere between 8 to 10 years, and then released as a vintage. And then the full production of 2024 released as a vintage, some point in the distance. And the idea is that each year we're trying to make a better and better whiskey. And that might mean, maybe the first year we go in working with 3 yeasts. The next year we go in working with those 3 yeasts, but we've learned how to handle them better, and we're slightly adjusting our wood program. Maybe the next year we've discovered a new yeast that we love a lot, and so we swap out one of our yeasts and put that one in to enhance the single malt over there. And so you're on a never-ending journey to make a better and better Scotch whiskey, and see where the journey leads you. And I think that's fascinating, not just for us, but also, for our consumers as well. Can go back to us and see the way that Port of Leith single malt will evolve year in, year out as well. So yeah, there's some really, really great things about being new. I mean, I say that we're still not over that horrendous cash flow crunch, but assuming we get over that bit, it'll be lovely.
Turn that heating off, Paddy. Get that heating off, man.
I get it's the kind of issue of walking in the morning and finding an email from me and saying, "Can you please send 300,000 euros to my friend Enrique for some casks?"
Yeah,
sure, why not?
Hey,
that's money.
They're going to be good casks. They're going to be good.
They will
casks,
be.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so on that, you've alluded to the point there, releasing it in vintages, and I'm quite interested to know, what to expect from Port of Leith Distillery. What are we talking inside the distillery in terms of like shapes of stills, number of stills, kind of output, roughly numbers, and then like you talked about style and flavour. Is there going to be a house style as such, or is that something that will shift as well with time?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, in terms of the numbers, we hope to ramp up to 400,000 LPA per year. So that will be operating on 2 shifts. So we've got a 1.5 ton mash tun in the distillery. We've got 7 washbacks, each of them 7,000 litres. And then our spirit still, which has just got a big old wide neck, because we want pretty much everything to carry through from the spirit distillation. So that'll be 7,000 litres. And then we've got a wash still. A wash still. Excuse me.
Yeah, wash still first. Yeah.
And then the spirit still is where we've put in a longer neck, and that's at 5,000 litres. And so that's where we're looking to increase our copper interaction and create a more delicate spirit ultimately for the final spirit. And I think, what's always captured me personally with whiskey, because I spent a decade in the wine industry, and what we look for in great wines is complexity and length. And I think you train yourself in wine and you learn to identify all the different flavors. With me, with whiskey, I was struck on just how they're there. Even a layman can pick up a whiskey and pick up 2-3 different flavors just like that. And for me, that's alchemy, that one thing can taste of many different things. And I think Scotch whiskey, more than any other beverage in the world, is capable of just the most incredible complexity. And so if there's an overreaching goal, it is that it's a delicious, complex spirit. And I think in order to achieve that, it must be a delicate spirit. So we won't be using peated malt in our distillery. It's going to be lowland in that way, I suppose. And we will be seeking to have a gentle marriage of as many different characteristics as possible, pulling, as I say, those fresh characteristics from the ferment, those additional secondary, tertiary flavors from the maturation, and creating what I hope will be one of the most complex, delicious whiskies available anywhere in the world. Even though we've got this focus on maturation, on fermentation, we have taken great care to focus on the other elements. So our grain, we found a single farm just outside Edinburgh that we're going to be getting all of our grain from. We wanted it to be as close as to Edinburgh as possible, so we've got that provenance angle, but also working with a single source means that we can talk into what grain we're using, how it's grown, and over the years enhance that piece of the puzzle. And then over on the other side of maturation, again, we looked at that and discussed how can we enhance this element. And again, rather than using just any old casks from brokers or a cooperage, we decided to go out and find the best producers we could and work directly with them to use their barrels to mature our whiskey. So one of the very first things we did back in 2017, it was totally nuts, but we launched a sherry.
Which I'm a big fan of. I've had a few bottles of it, the Oloroso. Very tasty stuff. And you had a bottle of port out as well. A nice ruby, didn't you? Yeah.
Tawny port. Yeah, absolutely.
Was that a tawny? Yeah.
Yeah, so we found an amazing producer, Bodegas Baron, small, incredibly old, but very modern focus, and they're making just exquisite Oloroso. We're now actually shipping what was our favorite wine of theirs, the Manzanilla. We now have that in stock as well. And it's just
cool.
Incredible. Paddy and it's partly about finding quality sort of source for casks, but also just celebrating sherry, which we love so much and plays such an incredibly important role in the whiskey industry. But we don't talk about the sherry very much. So we wanted to get that right in front of our customers.
How much wine was landed in LEITH, back in the day?
All of it. Yeah. And whenever we talk about it with people, the immediate reaction is always, oh yeah, that's my auntie drinks that at Christmas, or something like that. And it's always a cream sherry, a really sweet sherry served warm, and that is not what sherry is. Now, I think people have misunderstood what it is because for whatever reason we've lost that. We've lost as a country. We've been drinking different things and we've forgotten what good sherry is. And actually, it goes, the Manzanilla we have is bone dry. There's not it's so pure and crisp and clean as an aperitif. It's just outstanding. And I think if you give that to someone, they'll imagine it more as a full-bodied, white wine than as a, and then you're saying, put the Bristol cream down and concentrate on what actually sherry could be.
I think it's intriguing for a lot of people now to be able to taste those wines and think about how those flavors are going to enhance our whiskey as well. It's and I think it almost helps sort of piece together a whiskey as well when you're able to taste the wines and understand what that cask is going to do. Then we did the same with the port. We found an incredible port producer who was selling all of her production to a larger blender, and we're now bottling her 6 to 8 year old Tawny port, which is just exquisite. Won a gold medal from Decanter quite recently. It's an incredible wine. One of my favorite things now is, we began to focus on where we would get our ex-bourbon casks from. And I mentioned, years and years ago, Paddy and I, when we were first getting into whiskey, going out to New York to visit Kings County Distillery. Well, now we've just, in fact, literally received our invoice for their barrels. So we're going to be working with Kings County ex-bourbon casks as well to mature.
Well, look, that's so interesting, and you touched on Lowland, and I did a tasting recently actually with Little Mill in Rosebank, just over in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago, and it was brilliant, and it really kind of it reminded me when I started in the industry with Diageo a few years ago, 2005 or something. There weren't that many Lowland distilleries in operation. I think there was 3. I don't even think Bladnoch was producing at that time. I think it had been closed again. So it was probably just Glenkinchie, Auchentoshan, and Daft Mill was just about to fire up, I think. So, fast forward to where we are today, and actually looking forward to 2023 when you guys are producing spirit, there's going to be almost sort of 22 or 23 Lowland distilleries producing single malt, which is so exciting. And actually, as what was historically maybe the less attractive region, if you were to look at the whiskey regions, now it seems to be where all the action is. It's so exciting to hear what's going on in the Lowlands, and you'll belong to that region, right? Whether or not you value the name of Lowlands much, I don't know. I mean, you can answer that, but I think it's super cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting, regionality in whiskey, and of course, it's been disregarded by many and become quite a confusing element. But I must say, I like it. Regionality in wine is so key. I know if I'm drinking a wine from the Loire, pretty much what grape's going to be in there, and I have an understanding of what kind of wine I'm going to buy. And I think it's a very useful way for people coming to Scotch whisky to navigate it to some extent. But I think it's fair that it's something that hasn't stood still, and that there are anomalies within every region. There are people making peated whisky, all over the place now, and it's not something that you just associate with the Highlands or either. But nevertheless, I think there is a characteristic, developing in Lowland. I mean, people speak of, the more delicate floral style of Lowland whiskey. But I think actually, as you have identified, there's so many new whiskey distilleries in this region that I think it's almost becoming the region of innovation, of experimentation, of dynamism, and I think other areas, the further north you go, the more steeped in tradition, and history you find. But the Lowland is the sort of the new kid on the block, I guess, in that character. And there's, as you say, a lot of very exciting distilleries making very cool spirits down here.
Yeah, so, and I think one thing that we get asked a lot is this question of, oh, hang on, all I'm seeing right now is new distilleries popping up all over the place. The boat sailed here. And I look at the demand for Scotch specifically globally, and how that's growing, how the spirits category in general has grown versus wine and beer, and how cocktails have taken off, and there's so much more room to grow here. And at the same time, you see that we're all tiny. We're 400,000 LPA. And then you see one of the giants of the industry adding. They can add 10 million LPA, within 2 years, and they're pumping out exactly the same spirit and doing the same thing. The demand is there. These guys at Diageo and Pernod Ricard, they're much smarter than us. They know where the demand's coming from. They know their numbers. And if they're pouring money into expanding their brands and their existing brands, then that's screaming out to the rest of us that, look, there's a lot of room here. And crucially, again, if you look at the supermarket wine aisle, you see the number of brands out there for wine, and then you look at spirits, and it's the same 30 different distilleries you're seeing in every supermarket over and over and over again. Like, there is room in this market for more players. We're not scared at all of new entrants. Well, actually, we think it's great, because I think, if anything, the Scotch whisky category desperately needs that kind of spark of ingenuity and innovation from new people that you get from different brands around, even if it's just packaging or different ways of selling, but also around different flavors and different ways of producing the spirit, within the rules, crucially. But a new bit of innovation is why people globally will hopefully continue to see single malt Scotch whisky as the kind of global premium category above all others, and that's what we're trying to maintain.
Yeah, but you need creativity, and creativity comes, through people like yourselves. I've always found, founders with an idea, genuine passion, a thirst for knowledge and curiosity. And we've talked a lot about the technical stuff, about your fermentation and your yeast, but I have to say, I'm massively excited about what your brand becomes, because I love the artwork that you guys have of your distillery, which is so lovely. It's exactly the kind of thing people will have up in their homes. Now, I don't think there's a lot of distilleries that could say that could, hang branded artwork in their homes and actually looking brilliant. And I think what you've created there is great. And obviously, you've got Linden Lime as well, which is a beautiful, beautiful product as well, isn't it? Right. So
I think this goes back to something we were talking about at the very beginning, when you're looking at what the industry has traded off over the last 200 years, which is tradition and heritage and legacy and maturity, and that's worked fantastically for it. And we never want to say that's a bad thing, but coming in new means that we can do things. We don't have any history, we don't have any legacy, so therefore we don't have that burden, and we can embrace being new as a good thing. And so we can have fun with our artwork and with our branding and our logos and so on, and say, this is a brand new distillery. It's not got a pagoda. It's not a whitewashed stone wall. It's a rectangular box with a big ass window and an amazing outlook in a really cool part of Edinburgh. That's just, you couldn't do that if you're a different distillery, and as a result, we get access to all that cool new stuff that no one else can do, which is really fun.
It's really why running a business like this is such incredibly good fun, because you get to be creative in so many different ways. I mean, we're here because of the product and the creativity with Scotch whisky, but it just never stops. I think one of our favorite things we ever did was hire our in-house graphic designer, Tyrone, who, you know, you have those ideas and he can just realize them. And we even say, you know, Tyrone, when you're bored, just design us a poster, because we like those too.
Tyrone's clearly one of those annoyingly talented people, right? Isn't it? You say stuff and he comes back and you're like, can't I do that? It's just another reminder that I can't create things that look like that. Yeah.
And you hope that he's actually not cool and he's like a bit geeky, but then it turns out he's just really cool and really nice and really fun.
But you know,
he's just the worst human.
When you're sort of a fairly average, not particularly creatively talented person, but you've got an idea, suddenly like someone like Paddy and I can have ideas and then have this professional guy like realize them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really good fun.
You're like, that's what I meant. Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah, totally. Love that. I love that. No, it's brilliant. And guys, thank you so much for joining us. Really cool to hear more about what you guys have got going on down at Port LEITH. And yeah, it's going to be an amazing 5 or 6 months. And once you're up and running, we must get you back on and hear how it's going. And hopefully you're still friends. That'd be good.
Guys, I think the next time we do this, we'll do it from the bar at the top and you can just sit there and watch all the ships coming in and out of the port, and watch them unload grain and unload. Let's say grain. They unload gravel. They can course them unload gravel on the
Yeah, totally. And I'm sure Mitch will join us as well if he's not too busy floating around Speyside.
Sure.
Speyside old-fashioned, man. You got to be in LEITH. That's where it's at.
Yeah, there we go.
Exactly. He actually lives in Aberdour, so he could probably see the distillery from his house. Get the telescope out.
Well, we know the thing because flying into Edinburgh, you go through the Firth of Forth, so you see it very clearly from the airplane now, and it's basically a thing. All of our friends, whenever they're kind of coming into Edinburgh, they go, "Look, I can see your distillery." It's like, yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's the 10th one of those we've received today. But it's
the only black building. Everything else around it is grey. Yeah. So you really stand out nicely against their backdrop.
Brilliant. And then for people who want to follow the story, how do they follow Port LEITH on social, website, stuff like that?
Yeah, we're generally at LEITH Distillery on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Definitely sign up to our mailing list because that's where you get the real nitty gritty.
Mailing list is the best place to be because that's the super advanced preview information.
Yeah,
and crucially, in the future, the distribution mechanism for a lot of the whiskey will be via the mailing list. So ideally, the best place to be is on the mailing list.
Well, we would say right now we have launched our it's kind of our version of the Founders Club, the Quality Control Division, where it's £500, but we're about to make it available with Klarna, so you can pay in installments, and you get to follow the maturation of our new make, receiving samples each year as it matures, and then you get some single cask bottles up after 7 years. But also as part of that, we'll be inviting you every year to come back to the distillery to taste what we've been making. And you like, if you want the full kind of take the journey with us, that's the way to get involved. Yeah. And we like to think it's a pretty unique offering that should be absolutely fascinating for any. Yeah. It's the stuff that fascinates us, and we've made it available to everyone else. So
sounds like a good Christmas gift. It's a good time of year. Yeah. My father-in-law, if he lives that long, you'll see it to 7 years old, as you say. Brilliant. All right, guys. Look, great to catch up, and we'll see you soon. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Cheers so much.